The mitigation isn't someone coming up and saying, oh, well, if this happened, we're going to do this. No, you need to have a plan that is a step-by-step process of what is going to happen, how it's going to happen, and who's going to be in charge of that process. Because if you turn around and just say, when we get hit, this is what we're going to do. Okay, so where's the planning? Where is the actual going through the process of this happening? Because if you don't go through the process, anything on paper always sounds good. But when you put it into actual action, that's where the problem will arise, because now you're thinking, oh, wait, we shouldn't turn the computer on if it still has a problem with the power supply. Don't you think you need to pick the power supply out first and then insert a new power supply and then turn it back on? Something like that.
Hello and welcome to Secrets of AppSec Champions. My name is Chris Lindsay, and today we will be speaking with Samuel Brown. Today's conversation will be around risk mitigation. Samuel is the CEO of PacketX. Samuel, please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Samuel Brown, and I am the CEO of PacketX. I'm also a 27-year veteran that just recently retired from the U.S. Army as a CW4 or warrant officer out of Signal Corps.
Awesome. Samuel, thank you for your service.
Thank you for your support.
So today's conversation is going to be really cool and amazing. So Samuel and I have done some conversations back and forth. And what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about risk mitigation. Samuel, where do we start with risk mitigation? That is a really wide topic.
Yes, it is. And it's all revolves around the same things. Being able to determine what your risks are and how to mitigate those risks, and also be able to put those risks in certain levels. Meaning, which ones are going to be the ones that's going to be most detrimental to your organization, and other ones that you can we can just worry about that a little bit later on. One of the things that I've noticed, going through a lot of the posts and stuff, where people will go in there and say, well, hey, this company didn't do ABC in terms of risk mitigation, and they didn't know what they was talking about. The problem is we are on the outside looking in, and we have no idea what they have in place in terms of risk mitigation.
Well, that's true. So, I mean, before you can have risk mitigation, you got to have risk identification.
One of the companies that I did some consulting for, they had a risk mitigation that just blew my mind. If you can think of anything in terms of how to ensure that you have data saved, data on standby in terms of being ready to go again, which is all put into your hot standby or cold standby facilities, and you having backups that you can restore instantly. This company had everything, so even if they lost a facility, you wouldn't even notice the hiccup.
Nice. That's a lot of good planning involved. Takes a lot of planning to get there.
So in order to make that happen, it takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of time. But most importantly, it takes a lot of good planning with a lot of people that understand what is required in order to make sure that you can make this risk no longer even a concern. Yes, you can still have that risk, but it's no longer something that'll just stop your business from running at all.
And, this is a great topic. I'm glad we're going down this path, because really, when you start thinking about it, how many companies are in this spot where they can say, you know what, we can have an event happen and we're going to be okay. Because a lot of companies, their backups, they go back through and they hadn't tested their backups, or their backups weren't even actually working and nobody even noticed. And so having a good plan, having a good process in place is key for success.
Very much so. I've ran into a few companies that had not had a good backup and have not tested their backups. One of the funniest things that I've heard, it was through a client that stated where he said, my most interesting and most expensive learning session was when I got hit with ransomware. I didn't take the time to do the backups like I was asked to from this was back in the day, like I was asked to by a previous tech. And when I got hit, he couldn't do anything. So I had to end up sending my hard drive to California, or I should say he had to send his hard drive to California. And he ended up getting it resolved, sent it back, And from that point forward, he understood my data is not only saved on my local machine, but it's also saved at a remote machine. So then that way, if I should get hit again, only my machine is messed up, I can simply just wipe my drive, pull everything back down. I'm good to go. He always had his risk mitigation in place.
Well, and there's a lot of aspects to the backup as well. I mean, because if you're backing up to another device that's on your network locally, that's accessible, it can still be damaged. If you have a shared drive externally, that's still accessible, depending on how that drive system is created, the shadow copies or whatever's happening behind the scenes. Again, if I was going to go out and try to do some damage, I would write the same file multiple times in a way that the backups would no longer be valid. So having a good backup plan, strategy, and process in place is key. So, you've got the risk identification, you've got the assessment that you've got to do to figure out, hey, what can happen? What's the threat model for, my business, for my company, what does that look like?
So when it comes to the risk assessment, like you said, we need to put everything by tiers, or we put it in levels. What can shut your business down the quickest if you don't do this? So in the case of a company that does data mining, that data is a necessity. So they would do everything that they need to in order to ensure that they don't lose that data. Another risk assessment that can should be looked upon is the computers themselves, because you may get hit with a virus where it makes it impossible for you to use that machine. And now here it is, you are no longer an asset to the company. You're now a liability because you can't do the work. You're still getting paid, but you can't see your customers, and now that may give the company a bad name because not only you're not able to communicate, but you're not able to get the job done. Now, with that said, risk is what is more important. You getting that employee a second computer, so then that way they can, if they should get hit on one, they can just jump over to the next one and get the work done? Or is it more important that you make sure you have your data backed up someplace nice and safe, so then that way if you are again hit, well, I lost my data for about 10 seconds. Hey, let's jump over to this other network where the data is nice and safe, and you're back in business. And really, nobody noticed that hiccup. So going back to my original statement at the very beginning, we don't know the business model of that company and what they deem to be more important, because we might say, oh, man, that's just common sense to just put another computer out there. Yes, it is. However, does it make financial sense to put a second computer up that you won't be using for probably ever, whereas you need that data right now?
Well, and you bring up a good point. I mean, if you have ransomware come through, it could wipe out all the computers on your network that's live. So maybe this computer needs to be offline, off the network, so that way, something doesn't happen. One of the things to do is, okay, if I get hit with ransomware, one of the first things I think of is, A, is it still active in my environment? B, how do I get back up to a running state? But really third, and almost the number one, how did they get in? How did they break into my network? Are they still in my network? I mean, because a lot of times the first thing they do is create that back-end port to open up a link back to them. So then that way, even if you reboot your computer or reboot your network or do things, that backdoor always reopens itself. And so making sure that, you've closed that back door, you've locked the ability for them to come back in, and then you start actually figuring out, what's the damage, what's the blast radius, and how do we go from here?
Right. And that's a very good point, which leads into something way off topic here. But that's where, we're actually kind of jumping ahead. Security by layers. Because now you got to do the training for the personnel to ensure that they don't go to sites that they're not supposed to go to, that they're not opening things that they're not supposed to open, especially when emails come in that they're not accustomed with, even though some places you have to open the email. So you kind of have to let that one slide, if you will. But, you should have your security in place that would scan all the emails to try to at least catch the maximum amount of spam or malicious emails that have come in. An organization, which I'm not going to put the name out there, their website was compromised. Just to give you a perfect idea, this website wasn't anything that was like a site that you wouldn't go to. It's something you would go to every day just because they provided a service that people, apologize, they provided a product that people actually needed and wanted. But unknowingly, you go to their website, you just got infected. You have to make sure you have everything done in layer to ensure that you can prevent these type of things, or limit these type of things that are happening. So then that way you can reduce the risk that to your systems that will prevent you from doing your employees from doing the work.
No, that's a good point. I mean, one of the things that was very common back in the early 2000s is the ability to, when you're creating a website or a web page, that you're bringing in a third-party dependency, that you point to the source itself outside of your network. And that was common in the old days. Today, I hope nobody's doing that. If you do, and you hear this, change that, bring a copy down, bring it locally, validate the dependency, make sure it's not malicious before you just keep going. But when you're pointing to an external resource and it gets compromised, guess what? Now you're compromising not just you, but your potential customers as well. And if you're doing a product or service, guess what? Your lack of security is going to impact them as well. And so you're right. I mean, security by layers, right? So you've got permissions, proper permissions, right? Role-based access, things there. I see multi-factor as being something that's just simply required. If it's just not out there, if it's not in your application, or if it's not even in your environment to do your basic login or whatever, if you're logging in remotely, that's a big problem.
And a lot of the people that are out there today, they are very understanding the fact that you need to have the MFA or multi-factor authentication in order to keep you protected. But a lot of people, they just don't seem to get that. And when it comes to businesses, the risk that they take by not go ahead and implementing that leaves them open for so many issues that is not even funny. And then trying to figure out which one of those vulnerabilities actually compromised your organization, it makes it even harder, because now if you're using a single sign-on for all your users, you don't know who is that users that probably created that problem. You have no idea what they downloaded. And on top of that, if they should do something malicious, you have no idea, again, who did it and what they did. Well, you easily find out what they did, but you just don't know who did it. It's impossible.
Right. Well, and you bring up a good point, because if you have MFA turned on, guess what? You're not going to have password sharing. If you don't have MFA turned on, you may have companies where somebody uses their password or shares their password. And when you start having that and somebody downloads something or does something malicious internally by accident or on purpose, now you get blamed, or somebody else gets blamed inaccurately. And so, password sharing is an absolute no. I mean, we all know this. It's part of our training, but it still happens today in companies of all sizes. It's not just small, it's large. And so having MFA as part of the authentication process helps guarantee that, guess what? Nobody's going to be able to password share, because if they are, they log in, guess what? Then I've got to pull out my phone. I've got to do my authentication for them. And if something happens, guess what? You're legally liable. You're legally responsible, because now you help them with the authentication. And now you're actually saying, you know what? Whatever you do, I authorize, because you're on my account. So who would know any different?
Are you familiar with the CAC cards that they use in the military? Okay. So when it comes to military, they give you your ID card, and on your ID card, at the very bottom, there's a little gold chip that you have to insert into your machine. And once you insert it into the machine, you have to put in a 6 or 8 digit PIN in order for you to gain access to that device. Now, just because you have a CAC doesn't mean you have access to the machine, because they may not have your account on that domain. But anyway, the thing that the military says is, if you should get up from your machine and you cannot physically see it, take your CAC with you, because you're now giving permission to anybody to use your machine. Case in point, we had a couple of I'm gonna keep it general, soldiers that left their machine wide open with their CAC in it. And so what was happening was, other soldiers would go and get on that person's account and log in. I mean, I'm sorry, not log in. Open up their email and send out emails to people with all type of crazy stuff in it. Nobody was doing anything malicious, but it was just really funny. You're E3 or E4 and you send an email to a high ranking enlisted person or officer saying, hey, we're going to have jello shots tomorrow. You're going to be there. And it's like, who are you in the first place? Well, the problem is that person account, the owner of the account can't go back and say, oh, I never sent that. It's repudiation because of the fact that it's your account. So you can never say, I never sent it, even though you was away. Because now if you do say, oh, I didn't send it. Now the question is, why was your machine unsecured? So you're in trouble either way it go. So you got to be on your P's and Q's.
Kind of funny you bring that up, because for years in the office, if somebody left their computer open, we would always email the floor or the group or the team or multiple teams and say, guess what? I'm bringing donuts in on Friday. Let me know what you want, because I'm bringing them. And then we'd always hold them, to that. So let's talk about risk mitigation, right? So in order to do risk mitigation and risk tolerance and monitoring and assessment, all the stuff related to risk, it's important to really have a good ecosystem, a good environment, right? So, not only are we dealing with permissions, but we're also dealing with good firewall and configurations there. Can we deep dive a little bit on firewall security?
Well, before I jump into that, let me go back. Let me just touch on mitigation just a little bit. With the mitigation isn't someone coming up and saying, "Oh, well, if this happened, we're going to do this." No, you need to have a plan that is a step-by-step process of what is going to happen, how it's going to happen, and who's going to be in charge of that process. Because if you turn around and just say, when we get hit, this is what we're going to do. Okay, so where's the planning? Where is the actual going through the process of this happening? Because if you don't go through the process, anything on paper always sounds good. But when you put it into actual action, that's where the problem will arise, because now you're thinking, oh, wait, we shouldn't, and I'm totally making this up, you shouldn't turn the computer on if you still has a problem with the power supply. Don't you think you need to take the power supply out first and then put it in? I mean, insert a new power supply and then turn it back on, something like that. But firewalls comes in multiple flavors. And when I say multiple flavors, I'm really referring to the fact of you can have a firewall that is for your edge of your network, edge of a particular segmentation of your network. And then you can have a firewall that is for your system. So it's like a host-based firewall. So you can have multiple layers of firewalls to ensure that whatever comes in outside should get caught by the second one. And if not, it definitely should get caught by the third one to ensure that you're keeping your stuff safe. Now, you can further break the firewalls down into what is known as context-based firewalls. And context, or if you use Cisco, zone-based firewall. So you're putting everything in zones. So if zone A doesn't need to talk to zone 2, they would never talk, but they're using the same firewall. Also, with that said, you don't want to use the same firewall throughout your entire network. So you want to use multiple vendors throughout that. So ensure and the main reason you want to do that is not that you want to give a person a very difficult time that's managing your network. You want to make sure that if one firewall has a bug in it, the other vendor shouldn't have that same bug. Yes, the hacker or malicious person, we just got through the first firewall, but now you got to start your entire process back over in determining what bug or bugs are on the other firewall that you need to try to circumvent in order to get through that one. And the same applies to the local machine.
And that's what I typically, if you've seen any of the stuff I put out there, I talk about the 95% rule. 80% is covered by this firewall, 80% is covered by this firewall, but that overlap between the two creates that 95% coverage. There's always that ability to break in, break through, no matter how good you are. I mean, the only way that you're ever going to 100% protect your computer from ever getting anything is to have it turned off, unplugged, no network, no nothing, no cables. And even still, there's probably something that can still happen.
Actually, That's not even true. I found out something very interesting not too long ago. Remember when Apple came out with I believe it's the M2 processor earlier this year? That process was already compromised before it even got onto the market. And the only reason why the only reason they found it was because they was actually looking for another vulnerability on there. And that's when they found out that that chip had already been compromised by another virus, and no one even knows what that virus does. And I haven't been keeping up with it because I'm not a big Apple fan, but it's just amazing. So the statement I like to make is the only safe computer is the one that hasn't been built yet.
Well, that's true. That's true. That's true. So, we've talked about, the software, we've talked about the hardware, we've talked about the firewalls, we've talked about how, everything comes together. What about patching? I mean, is patching critical for all this? I mean, what's your thought around patching? Because if I'm running the latest and greatest, am I possibly bringing something in? But if I'm running something old, may I be dangerous because of that as well?
The common theme is patch, patch, patch. You always want to have the latest patches on your machine because of the fact that it should be, and I like to use the word should because it can never be 100% totally sure, especially if you don't write the program yourself. It should resolve those vulnerabilities that has been found by a malicious hacker, be it a black hat, gray hat, or a white hat hacker. And that that patch should resolve all those issues or the majority of those issues. However, the problem is, and I've been reading this in other articles where, yes, they patched the issues, but what they ended up doing was reintroducing an old issue that was in there, opening everything back up. You have to do your own homework, especially if you're a big corporation. What they do is they download it and they test it out for weeks before a couple of days before they're putting it out there onto their systems to ensure that they are not going to introduce a vulnerability onto their network. Another thing to add with that is this: software that you rarely or never use. You need to remove that because that's just another avenue for a malicious hacker or malicious person to get into your machine. And I know you sit there thinking, oh, I just don't use Solitaire a lot, but I'm just going to keep it on there. Well, if Solitaire has a vulnerability, whether or not you use it makes the difference of you keeping your machine more secure by not having it on your machine at all.
No, absolutely. And you bring up a good point. If you have software that's sitting idle, that's not being used, it's not getting auto-updated. If it's not getting auto-updated, it's sitting there as a potential, way of getting compromised. And that's, you bring up a good point too about software and about, reverting back code. Developers do have a really bad history of, if they have to roll back code, they have something, they have a bug, they have a vulnerability, something that gets fixed, it goes forward, somebody has a hot fix, they've got to roll the code back. Question is do they roll it back and reintroduce the vulnerability, or what happens there? And then let's say they revert it back prior to the vulnerability being fixed. They get it out the door, and somehow or another, sometimes that just stays in production and it never gets reverted back forward to be fixed. And so now you have something, you fix something, it gets reintroduced later due to a rollback or due to a developer failing to pull latest or in that environment. So
and to build from that, permissions is not just for permissions to that file or folder. Permissions is permissions for the actual machine itself. Do you need to log in as the administrator to open up Word and type a document?
I sure hope not. If you do, you've got bigger problems going on your network.
Yeah, and I'm a very big proponent of telling people to, if you don't need administrator rights, make sure you know the administrator account password. And if you don't know it, create one. And then remove yourself from the administrator group. Because this is the thing. If you have administrator rights and you go to a website that has malicious code on there, if you have administrator rights, then guess what happens? It has the same permissions that you have, and they can go through your machine and install whatever it needs to without your permission or knowledge. But if you're just a regular user, what's going to happen? It's going to read like, oh, this person doesn't have permissions to do anything. It's going to stop it cold, and it's going to say, okay, well, I need to go elsewhere to find somebody I can circumvent. Now, a lot of them are smart enough to go to the administrator account and try to use that account. But if you go in and you change the password to something, and please don't say you change your password to your cat's name or your dog's name or your birthday. Please make it a little more creative in order to keep it secure. But make it where they can't use a dictionary code or a rainbow table, in order to circumvent to get the username and password from your administrator account and take over and just install what they want to.
Well, and a lot of web servers are running, or, definitely like Tomcats, IIS, but web servers are running as administrator accounts. And that's a terrible thing. Because just like you said, if there's a vulnerability and I'm able to exercise that vulnerability, like a command injection, command execution, all of a sudden I'm now running as administrator on that box. And guess what? Now I can not only work and do anything on that box, but most likely I can leave that box, because if I can figure out what the password is, most likely you freeze that same administrator password on all the boxes or whatever account that is it's running. Usually you're running a web farm to some type. So now I can infect the whole farm and then maybe even, go east-west a little bit further from there.
This is something I think that really should be stated for small businesses. And it's just a normal thing I've heard many, many times before. I'm a small business and nobody cares about what's on my machine.
Oh, no, they do. They always do.
You're so easy to get into that it's not even funny. So they launch their attacks from your machine that creates issues for you in the long run, because now you're trying to figure out why is all these people calling you, because you don't call them whatnot. But I would say this real short thing. There was another small company that believed that no one wanted to was going to attack them. Long story short, they didn't have any issues for about 7, 8, 9 months. They thought everything was perfect from an IT perspective. It turned out that they had got compromised way before that. And the person that was that had compromised their system was managing their network for free. But at the same time, this person was hosting his illegal activities from their network.
Well, and what's a good way to monitor that? What's for risk monitoring, right? What's a good way to identify those and find those? I mean, we have large and small companies listening to this podcast. So the question becomes, if you're a smaller company, how would you identify? You're not spending thousands and thousands of dollars out on a good, a high-end firewall. Because if you're a small player in the industry, you may be going with something a little bit smaller, more affordable. Or maybe you are going for the more enterprise level, depending on, what you're doing.
So when it comes to the large businesses, like you said, it's fairly, I'm not going to say fairly simple, because it's never easy. The thing is, you have the personnel in place that can monitor the utilization of the bandwidth in terms of why is this one server pushing out so much data between these hours? Easy catch. If someone is looking at the firewall and they're noticing, hey, we're getting hit on port, I'm gonna say port 777. That's not okay. That's a reason why we need to take a look. Or we're getting a lot of IP addresses. No, we're getting a denial attack. When it comes to a small business, it is extremely hard because of two simple reasons. One, the person doesn't notice that there's an issue, or if there is an issue, they just chalk it up that they have an old computer.
Oh, it's running slow. I mean, it is an old computer, right? So I guess this is normal. Wrong.
And then that's exactly right. You can easily go into your task manager and just look at the CPU process, click on it, make sure that you have it oriented where the highest, the process that's using the most cycles is at the top. So you can see, oh, wait, my antivirus is using 90% of my process right now. Okay.
There's a reason for that.
Yeah. Is it scanning for viruses? Am I being attacked? Is it trying to get rid of a virus or something like that? At that point, you need to be concerned, but not overly concerned because your antivirus is actually working. But if you see another process that's running, I'm just going to say Notepad, and Notepad is using the high process. Now that's a reason to be concerned.
Well, and attackers do that. They'll take common names like Notepad and different common applications that are on computers and run that. Another identity or IoT that you might think about when you look at indicators of compromise or IOCs. If you have a browser plugin like a Norton, a Trend Micro, whatever you're running for business, if you find that it just magically is just not showing up, go in. If you look at it and it shows disabled or uninstalled, you know something malicious has been on that box, because that's one of the very first things that they do to, make sure that they can get in. So Samuel, let me ask this question for you. I ask this question to everybody that comes on. What's the best advice that you've ever been given in regards to the work that we do?
If you are unsure of anything that you're looking at, ask for another set of eyes, because you don't know everything. And even if you know quite a bit, it's great to have someone else to come in there and look at what you're looking at to verify, yes, we have an issue, or no, this is not an issue.
No, that's good. And then let me give you the other one, the opposite. What's the worst advice that somebody has ever given you?
Don't worry about it. It'll be okay.
It's only a flesh wound. You'll be okay.
About the size of it. In the military, we've had, and I retired again as a Signal 1 officer. And one of the things that was of interest was we had a call manager that I was managing. It decided it wanted to shut itself down. But the good thing about it was shedding itself down in a process of where we could go in there and we can force it to shut down and come back up. If it do the shutdown itself, it wouldn't come back up. This guy that I was talking to on the other end of the phone, I'm telling him, look, if we don't do this, this is what's going to happen. He said, can't we just not worry about it? I said, well, who's your commanding officer? And he gave me a name, which I can't say on here, but let's just say he had a few stars. And I said, okay, so who do you want to argue with, him or me? I think I argue with you. Okay, well, in that case, then you better let me do what I need to do. And it was okay. So he was, and in reference to what you were saying, that was he was talking about, don't worry about it. We'll be fine if the server should crash. No.
That's always the case. Samuel, I appreciate you coming on today. I thank you for your time. I thank you for this. This has been a great conversation. I know that the listeners have gained a lot of knowledge from today, so I hope that they enjoyed it. And I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me. I did enjoyed it.
Thank you. Yeah, have a good one. Thank you so much for joining us today on Secrets of AppSec Champions. If you found today's information valuable, hit that subscribe button on your Apple Podcast, your Spotify, or wherever you're listening to today's episode. Ratings and reviews are like gold for us, so if you're feeling generous, please leave us a kind word, as it helps others find our show. Until next time, take care.